This webinar is brought to you by the AccessLex Institute and focuses on evaluation and how to create a meaningful evaluation plan for your grant proposal. The AccessLex Institute awards grants to fund programs that will have measurable impacts on legal education, whether enhancing access or making it more affordable for students. Evaluation is an essential component for demonstrating the effectiveness and scalability of your program and is a key factor when AccessLex Institute makes grant decisions. My name is Andrea Sykes, and in this webinar I will share with you tools and techniques that I've fine-tuned through years of working with various grant-funded programs. At the end of this webinar, you should have a better understanding of what an evaluation plan is, why it's important, and what AccessLex expects in your plan. You will also be shown tools that you can use as you develop the plan to ensure that your evaluation aligns with your program's goals and objectives, and will be given some ideas on how best to identify and allocate the resources that will be needed to complete the evaluation. The goal is to help you not only create a purposeful evaluation plan for your grant proposal, but also to have a plan that will give you information on whether your program is reaching its intended goals. What is program evaluation? Well, very broadly, it's a systematic analysis of information and data to measure how well a program is working, or think of it as sort of figuring out why does your program matter. The evaluation can examine the way a program is being operated or examine the results that are occurring. An effective evaluation can prove the value of a program to external funders or be used to share best practices with colleagues. Program evaluation can also be used by managers to target resources to the most effective strategies or for making program improvements. To have an effective evaluation, you will need an evaluation plan. The plan is a written document that communicates how you will go about evaluating your program, clearly describing who will be leading the efforts, the type of investments and activities in the program, and the intended results, outlining the questions and methods for assessing the program, and the resources you will be using to support and complete the evaluation. Writing a grant proposal can be a daunting task with many deadlines along the way. Evaluation will be one of several components that you will need to describe in the proposal. Getting to the final evaluation plan will require upfront planning to ensure that you stay on the road to your final proposal. There are 6 key steps along this road that you can follow to help you get to your high-quality evaluation plan. The first step is to decide who's going to write your plan. The second is to involve key stakeholders in the planning. The third is to figure out what you'll be measuring in the evaluation. The fourth will be writing evaluation questions. The fifth step will be selecting data collection methods to answer those questions. And the sixth step will be establishing a budget for your evaluation plan. The first step is fairly straightforward but critical, deciding who is responsible for writing the evaluation plan. It could be the grant writer or someone else on your team. It may be a committee of multiple staff members, especially if more than one department or organization operates the program. If you do have the plan written by a committee, you must be sure to be clear about each person's responsibilities and also have one person that's ultimately designated as the lead for writing the evaluation plan. You could also hire someone externally to help you write this plan, but they may want to be compensated for this work, and you'll need to factor that into your decision and your overall budget. If someone besides the grant writer is writing the evaluation plan, it's important that the grant writer and the evaluation plan writer work collaboratively and not in isolation. The grant writer should give clear timeframes on when the evaluation plan needs to be completed and allow time for the review of the plan to ensure it aligns to the overall grant proposal. The important thing is not to wait until the last minute to think about evaluation, but make it integrated into the entire grant proposal process. The second step on the road to your plan is to involve key stakeholders, those folks that are involved in the program, which can include faculty, mentors, or program staff. This step is important because it will ultimately give focus and meaning to your evaluation. It helps lay the groundwork that evaluation is important to the program, and you're not just checking off a box to meet a funder's requirement. By involving stakeholders in the planning process, they can learn the importance of evaluation and think of it less as a punitive activity and more as a purposeful and intentional way of improving the program and reaching goals. It helps reinforce the goals of your program so that everyone understands what you're working towards and builds buy-in for your evaluation plan. You can engage stakeholders in a number of ways. You can convene a work group and meet regularly to get their input, or if scheduling meetings is challenging, then you can utilize various digital tools to get their input virtually. The purpose is to ask for their input on key outcomes of the program, their ideas on how you can measure those outcomes, and build plans for collecting data that will support your evaluation. And you might also learn during this process about data that they are already collecting and that you could incorporate into your evaluation. This tool is a way to organize and document your stakeholders' ideas. The questions at the top show how you can talk with your stakeholders to solicit their input or thoughts during the process. This handout, as well as the other handouts that are being shared in this webinar, are available at the AccessLex website, listed below. The third step in the process is to figure out what you're going to be measuring. This graphic is an example of a logic model, which I've used in the past with other groups as they are planning their evaluation. It's a visual way to organize your program's inputs, outputs, and outcomes, and helps you think more about the investments that are being made, the activities that are being done, and the ultimate outcomes. The first part on the far left of the logic model are inputs, and this is what you invest in the program, be it money, staff, or contributions from external partners. The inputs ultimately lead to the outputs, or what you're doing in the program. Think of it as the types of activities that you're offering, or who is participating in your program. The third part of the logic model, on the far right, are the outcomes that you're achieving or accomplishing with your program. And it's good to think about outcomes at various stages. You could have short-term outcomes, which are changes in learning, knowledge, skills, attitudes, or motivation. Medium-term outcomes are more about changes in actions, behaviors, practices, or policies. And your longer-term outcomes are changes in the environmental or social conditions, or ultimately economic conditions. The time period that each of those outcomes can be achieved are probably going to be unique to the program and how you're operating it. How might a logic model look for a program designed to increase the number of underrepresented students in law school? This logic model here is a generic example of the types of inputs, outputs, and outcomes that might be identified for a diversity pipeline program. The input box highlights the possible stakeholders and resources in such a program. The output box shows types of activities, such as law school application support or job experiences in the legal field. The outcome box on the far right presents examples of short, medium, and long-term outcomes. A short-term outcome may be observed at the end of the program, and it might include an increase in students' knowledge of the law school admission process, while a long-term outcome might be observed 2 years later when students enroll in law school. The specific outcomes and timeframes will be unique to your program, depending on your program's goals, activities, and where students are in the educational pipeline. Handout number 2 is another resource that you can use as you're preparing your evaluation plan. It's a blank logic model template that you can access and fill in as you're trying to organize your thoughts to create your own logic model. Using the logic model, you can move to step 4, where you write evaluation questions. Questions are the key starting point of your evaluation. They frame the scope and design of your work. Evaluation questions should be clear and specific and identify what you will be assessing or measuring. Evaluation questions can fall into one of these 2 categories: implementation or process questions, or impact-effect questions. Implementation and process questions will help you understand if you are reaching the right students or whether the activities were implemented as you designed. The answers to these questions often can help you explain or understand the outcomes that are being observed. Implementation and process questions can be written from the inputs and outputs that you have identified in your logic model. The second group of questions are impact or effect questions. These are focused on measuring whether students are achieving the outcomes you want. These questions should reflect that you are measuring change, whether between students participating or not participating in the program, or a change over time. It's important to be clear on what student group you are assessing, particularly if your program operates over several years or if you're targeting activities for different groups of students. Impact and effect questions will come directly out of the outcome section of your logic model. Let's talk a little bit more about implementation and process questions. These questions can be derived from the inputs and outputs section of your logic model. You should write these questions in a way that allows you to examine how resources are being used to operate your program. A well-worded question can give you answers about whether the program is operating as you designed. For example, if you're trying to increase access to law school for a particular group of students, then you might have a question about whether the students in your program are meeting program participation criteria. This is particularly helpful for your evaluation if your grant funding is tied to serving a certain group of students. Another process question can focus on whether your program is offering activities to students that meet their needs. Such questions might be, what types of internships have local law firms, courts, or government agencies offer to students? An answer to this question will give you a baseline of what's being offered to students. A follow-up question would then ask the extent to which those internships have met student needs. Implementation and process questions are also good for program management purposes because they lead to data collection on student experiences that you can use to identify needed program improvements for future years. The second category of questions that you should include in your evaluation plan are impact or effect questions. These questions should be aligned to the outcomes identified in your logic model. They will allow you to describe how you'll measure changes occurring due to your program activities, whether over a short period of time or over the course of several years. For example, if you are providing activities to inform students about the law school admission process, you'll want a question that measures their change in knowledge after participating in your program. Such a question might be, how has students' knowledge of the law school admission process changed since participating in the program? Your evaluation plan could also include questions that will measure changes that have occurred a few years after participation in the program. Such a question might be, what percentage of program participants applied to law school? Or, what impact did participation in the program have on students' post-secondary education plans? Although these impact or effect questions may be beyond the time frame of the funding you're receiving for this program, they are important to include in your plan because the funder will want to know that you are looking at the long-term effects of your program activities. This tool is another resource that you can use to organize your thoughts. After listing out questions that you are interested in covering in your evaluation, you will need to prioritize which ones you can focus on in your evaluation plan. To do so may require some conversation with stakeholders to gather their ideas on what areas are most important to understand. Using this tool, you can document how your questions are derived from your logic model and use it as you work through that prioritization process. The fifth step in the evaluation plan development is selecting data collection methods to answer each of your questions. The questions you have written for your evaluation plan will drive the type of data you'll be using, the frequency with which you'll collect the data, and your methods for analysis. Possible data sources include program records, such as student applications to your program, surveys of students or program staff, feedback forms, interviews or small focus groups, or observations of program activities. Surveys and feedback forms are a good way to get information from a larger group of people. Before creating any new survey, be sure to see if your program already has some in place, and determine if the data from those surveys could be used to answer your questions. For survey data to be reliable, you will need to make sure that you have a high response rate. Ensuring a high response rate can take some time, so you'll want to budget enough time to get the surveys completed. No matter what data source you choose, clearly identify who or what you will need data about, the period of time that data will be needed, and if you're asking a question that measures changes over time, you'll need data from 2 different points in time to show that change. If you want to know about students' outcomes long after their participation, you'll need to have a mechanism in place to track those students over time. This could require extra time and resources outside of your normal program operations. Finally, you should think about when you'll need to report the results of your evaluation and make sure that your data collection methods will be available in a timely manner to prepare those reports. As you work through the possible data sources and analysis methods, this matrix here can be used to show the relationship between your evaluation questions and those data sources. It will also guide you to think about the possible limitations to your approach and the types of conclusions you might ultimately be able to make. As you're planning your evaluation, it's always important to keep in mind the final product that will be delivered, whether it's a report to a funder or an internal memo documenting the successes and areas of improvement in your program. Ultimately, Thinking of these steps will lead to an evaluation that matters. We've come to the last step in writing an evaluation plan, and that's establishing a budget for your evaluation. It can be hard to think about using limited program funds for evaluation, but it's critical that you adequately fund it. The results from a well-thought and executed evaluation plan will pay dividends for your program, enabling you to highlight successes you've seen, as well as demonstrate your commitment to making improvements if needed. A rough estimate for your evaluation is about 5 to 10% of your total grant budget. The data collection methods you've chosen and what needs to be created will impact this amount. Surveys are one area that can be more costly than anticipated because you may need to dedicate more time and resources to get an adequate number of responses to make your data valid and reliable. If you are able to identify an evaluator as part of your grant proposal, that's great, but not required. You may not be able to select an evaluator until the grant has been awarded. Potential evaluators may be located through other departments on your campus, or you may use this link here from the American Evaluation Association's Find an Evaluator website. You're at the end. You've put in significant work to create a thorough evaluation plan. Now you just need to bring it all together into one document. The final evaluation plan should include 4 key pieces. The first is a summary of your project activities and goals. The second is your evaluation questions, the data collection methods you're going to be using, and a discussion of the frequency with which you're going to be collecting data. The third section should outline the time frames for completing the work in your evaluation and what the ultimate deliverables will be from that evaluation work. And lastly, including a staffing plan of who the evaluator is going to be, the key stakeholders, and how you're going to communicate the findings of your work. On the AccessLex website, you can access this template to use for your final evaluation plan. It provides more details on the information that you can include in each section of your final evaluation plan. In addition to the tools I have shared in this webinar, there are many other resources available about program evaluation. Here are 3 websites that provide some user-friendly information about evaluation that you can access on your own time. Applications for the AccessLex Institute's 2017 Diversity Pipeline Grant Program will begin being accepted on March 1st through April 10th. This is a program that awards grants to programs that will conduct effective interventions to enhance access to legal education for students from diverse backgrounds. Any questions about this presentation or evaluation in general, please email me at asykes@lauriemevaluation.com. Any questions about the AccessLex grant program, please send to them via email at grants@accesslex.org. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.